Hello, I'm Vasant, and this is the Product Playbooks Podcast, a show that dives deeper into the craft of building winning tech products, specifically in Southeast Asia. Today on the show, I'm excited to have Nuno Jonet as a guest. Nuno is currently the head of product and tech at Necto, a fintech startup that provides API-driven multi-bank connectivity for treasury and cash management. Nuno is a highly accomplished product leader, having built award-winning products across different domains from fintech, banking to ad tech. He's a polyglot, being fluent in five different languages, which makes him a leader with a truly global mindset. He spent over 20 years in Singapore and has been recognized by CEO Insights Asia as one of the top product professionals in the region. Welcome to the show, Nuno.
Thank you, Vasan. I'm really, really happy to be here and very, very proud to be on your podcast. Congratulations for getting it going.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure having you here. Okay, so now, is there a fun, interesting fact that maybe I didn't mention that you want to share with the audience?
Well, you've mentioned I've been in Singapore for 20 years, but I'm clearly not from around here. I'm originally from Portugal. And I think one fun bit of that is that originally I wasn't cut out to be a tech guy. I was actually a surfer dude. And it's funny. I've tried to produce my own podcast together with my father, all about surfing, nothing to do with tech. So I don't know if that's a fun bit, but I just thought I'd show that everybody's got two sides. Yeah.
Cool. What is the podcast called?
Oh, it was a crazy. It was in Portuguese, but it was translated. It was in the name of the Father, the Son, and the surf. So it was a very casual conversational thing, talking about surfing, competitive surfing, surfing as a lifestyle. It was our life growing up, so it was worth talking about. We might pick it up again. I'm getting inspired by you.
Cool. So for the listeners, if you need to learn something about surfing with all the modern AI tools for translation, and if you're Portuguese, please go listen to this podcast.
Thank you.
In the name of the Father and Son.
The Father, the Son, and the surf.
Cool. Thanks, Nuno. That's awesome. Okay, so let's dive into the main topics today, like a few questions for you. Southeast Asia, right? You've been here 20 years. What do you see are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities for people building products? It could be product managers, founders, specifically in this region.
Okay, that's a very broad question. Good start. So I think the primary difficult thing or challenge about the way you put the question is indeed Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia isn't a unit, right? It's a collection of countries, and some of them very, very different, right? What works in one will not very likely to work necessarily in the rest. And there's a few that are more similar than others, but even then there's significant differences. So I think that poses some problems for whoever's in product management or, trying to be entrepreneurial, because especially for tech products, typically you want to go for scale. Southeast Asia's collective has tremendous scale. I mean, Indonesia alone is huge, but not everybody in Indonesia is as into tech as you might think. And, Singapore is a very tech-driven market, but it's tiny as a market. So this proves to be really challenging when you're trying to angle for a product position that could potentially grow towards all of these markets. It is not impossible. Depends a lot on the kind of vertical that you're going for, kind of service you're trying to provide. But I think this is what creates a lot of challenges, both for just getting started, for a venture, or even once somebody's at least started, okay, the next step is how are we going to expand? Maybe they had a plan when they first got started, or maybe they didn't. Either way, they're bringing in product people to try and help with that expansion. And that proves to be quite a bit of a headache for people who are, sort of just trying to get it figured out in terms of the whole of Southeast Asia. And that's just specific to Southeast Asia as a region, because after that, you have the problems that anybody has building a product, right? Who do you want to serve? Who are the people that you want to do stuff for? What makes you passionate as a consumer yourself, or as a business? What itches or what pain points do you want to fix? Is there a market? Are people willing to pay for it? These are all the fundamental questions that apply anywhere you are in the globe. But then when you try to do it at a regional level, you have to start thinking about a lot more of different shades of gray into this. It's like, okay, well, is there a localization concern? Does everybody speak English, or am I okay with even just Bahasa, or do I have to do more languages? Do I have to look at local script? and that's just the UI stuff, not to mention all of like compliance, cultural idiosyncrasies. These are, I can rattle them off. They're easy to speak about, but they're incredibly hard to navigate. And I think those are tremendous challenges. It's a lot of fun once you start surmounting them one by one, provided you have the right conditions and context to do so. But when you're just getting started, and or in your career or in your enterprise, it's daunting, to say the least.
Got it. Now let's unpack that a little bit, right? If I can.
Sure.
If I can ask you, is it more to do with, let's say, in we product people talk about the ideal customer persona, go to market, your channel strategy. Do you fundamentally believe people's behaviors are different in these markets, or is that the markets themselves don't have a need for a certain product if if it's a product that is doing something XYZ that's maybe needed in Indonesia but not in Vietnam, for example?
Yeah, I think it's more of the first one, which is people do have slightly different behavior. So the generic need is there, but the way people go about it is different enough that it warrants sometimes significant changes to how you do your product. So in many cases, it's really about localization. Okay, I need to use different words, or I need to use a different, my labels need to be in a different language. That's great. But there are others where you actually have to change the way you are representing things. I'll give you an example, a bit of an obvious one, but banking, for example, is very different when you're doing. It's different enough when you're doing normal banking that everybody is aware of, and when you're doing Islamic banking, you have to be very careful what terms you're using, just because of that cultural context. And this is just the sort of the superficial aspect of it. There's a lot more that goes into it when you're trying to observe these kinds of different expectations that different categories of ideal customer or ideal client persona would have. So it's really about, yes, there is a global persona that you can envisage, but then you have to realize that that person is going to be expecting something in Thailand, a completely different thing in Philippines, and going to Indonesia or Singapore again and again and again. And if you go to South Asia, again this compound. So it's more of those small shades of gray that can actually be a make or break difference in terms of how your product gets absorbed in those markets.
Okay, awesome. Opportunities, do you see any like within the same challenge as an opportunity, or where do you see our major opportunities for people building products?
I think right now, and maybe this is not so much about Southeast Asia, it's more about where and when we are in the world. There are opportunities just because of the way economics works, and how other places have become places that once were very um, mm, ideal for product development have now become very expensive, and so other places have taken that position as being ideal in product development. So if you're already native to those markets, that's definitely an advantage you can play to, because you'll be able to attract foreign projects that are looking for people to get things done at a price that they're comfortable with, or you are able to actually pitch for things to pitch perhaps to the region or even globally at a very enticing kind of cost basis for investors, for example. In terms of product categories, I think that's really hard to say, because there's still so much to do. There's so much creativity out there. People always talk about, I want to do the WeWork of that or the Uber of this. All of that is you could say all of that's been said and done, but I still see people coming up with really creative ideas and really cool approaches on how to do stuff. A friend of mine says there's nothing new under the sun. And to a certain extent, that's true. But the way you do it matters, and how you present it, and how you um, and how you engage your consumers is actually quite significant. I'd say I wish I could be more you know predictive and prescriptive in the kind of opportunities I can see around here, but it's too wide a scope.
Got it. And this is a question that I have in my mind personally, right? Like, so do you think there is a an opportunity for B2B SaaS in this region, right? Let's say, you know, or let's take a big B2B SaaS company that came out of Silicon Valley, like Palantir, for example, or or
Absolutely.
even like Figma or Canva. Now they're
Yeah.
like going into B2B SaaS.
Yeah.
Do you think there's an opportunity for anybody to build a big B2B SaaS business out of Southeast Asia? Because what we've seen is the likes of Grab and Gojek, and the Lazada and the Shopee of
Yeah.
the world.
I definitely think so, Vasant. And I think this is also a little bit of a global trend. But I think in many ways, I think Southeast Asia took early steps in that direction. So it depends on what you think about when you think about B2B tests. I happen to be working on a B2B SaaS, nowadays in the financial space, and those are actually quite, prolific, based out of Singapore or Hong Kong, traditional financial centers. But just think about all the work that's been done. And this, you could argue whether these are tech companies or not, but you could argue all of the logistics, last mile delivery businesses that exist out there, right? Those are fundamentally a B2B SaaS in the end of the day, right? Because the marketplaces aren't deploying their own people to do deliveries; they're hiring from these guys, and these guys then also go in subcontract. But fundamentally, the platform is where they're adding value, right? The logistics platform, and there are many examples of current examples that I can think of, at least in Singapore, where this has been successful. There's one or two that I can think of that weren't, but you can't win them all. But I do think that there are many other aspects where B2B SaaS in Southeast Asia is on a growth vector. Human capital B2B SaaS, so similar thing. The platform matters a lot, and then what you're trying to do is you're trying to deploy and manage human capital, gig workers, factory workers, that type of thing on a very efficient basis. This leads to a lot of other sort of corollary businesses. But from a pure tech perspective, I'm back to the problem I had with the previous question, right? The scope can be so wide for what you might need to do in a B2B SaaS. Some of the examples you quoted are very interesting, but I still see so much things to do. For example, just in fintech, for all the craziness that's been out there with crypto and all of the AI stuff that's out there, God bless them, there's still so much work to do with just what I call plain old meat and potatoes type of activities that are highly inefficient being done within the company. They take up a lot of manpower that could otherwise be used for doing things that are a lot more creative. So, if you're curious about what I'm talking about, maybe hit me up on LinkedIn. Maybe we can have a conversation about that. But yes, there's a lot of opportunities still there. And I think even more so and potentially easier, lower hanging fruit than in B2C SaaS.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. I think one thing I've seen is that maybe there's a lot of basic digitization that needs to happen still with a lot of
Yes.
businesses in this market. And then once those businesses are digitized, I think then really, I think so maybe the SaaS product needs to focus on maybe digitization with a new twist of AI added to it to make it even more user friendly, etc. But like that basic thing needs to be crossed. It's not like the US where lots of businesses already adopting all digital products, and then they're starting to now move into the next wave of digital products, which are AI powered automation, etc. I think if you start going with that in the market in the beginning here, I think that might be not a recipe for success. Do you think?
Absolutely. And I would argue that, AI under different names is already being applied to some of these problems. It's just, it used to be called big data before, OLAP, nothing new under the sun, like I was saying. So it's great that we're having this renewed interest and passion around AI, particularly generative AI. But we've been doing so much with large models, and you and I in our past have had participated in ventures that have tremendous data to work from and built immense models. So there's still a lot of digitization to happen, and people and businesses are looking high and low for ways that they can actually um, not necessarily save on manpower, but reorient manpower to things that are more suitable for human beings, and let computers do more of the the crappy work that is just repetitive and ultimately should be automatable. But just because of that 5-10% that is an exception, it becomes very, until generative AI or until some of the more smarter technologies came around, those were not so easy to get to.
Okay, makes sense. From your personal experience, has there been like a time when, like you led a product adaptation for the Southeast Asia market and how that went? If you can share anything.
Sure. I think my biggest point of experience there was when I was working at Standard Chartered as head of their mobile applications, the team lead on the product side. And it was what I was talking about, those little idiosyncrasies, earlier on. This is where I got, to feel that, the brunt of that. And it's amazing how little things that you never thought about can catch up to you. I already gave one example in terms of, and this is a fairly well-known one if you're in the banking industry, Islamic banking uses different terms for different things. But there are so many others, like different products different things that or different names that given to the same thing.
Hmm.
So, in India, I learned, this is years and years ago. Now I know better, but in India, I learned about this earned monthly installments, EMI. It's a very standard term that everybody knows about, but I didn't, right? And so when I first had to deal with that as a product manager, and how do we implement that in our application so that you can transform a transaction into an EMI, which is a very popular, buy now, pay later type of thing that became so
Yep,
popular later on.
exactly.
This was an eye opener for me, and it's something so simple. And maybe it was me being naive, but I'm talking about those kinds of things, and there are others. And so uh, I won't name the place, but I can even tell you we had a mobile banking application that was a hybrid app, which was part of it was mobile web based, and then there was a wrapper around it, and we did everything we could to make it perform very well, and for the most part it did. In places like Singapore, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Malaysia, we had no problems. But it all went downhill when we finally had to deploy the same app in the market that didn't really have 3G. 3G, deployed in the region yet, and not even the very rich people had 3G yet. They had iPhones, but they didn't have 3G. And and the app, of course, didn't work very well. And so this was another sort of wake up call to say, just because you live in a place like Singapore or Hong Kong where it's very, very sophisticated doesn't mean everybody else in the region, whether Hong Kong is in the region or not could be debatable, but just because you're in that situation doesn't mean everybody else in the region is going to have the same circumstances, the same context as you do. So that was a hard lesson, because we only discovered this at the final, like when we went to UAT in the region, and then we realized, oh my God, why is this so slow? And then we realized, it's slow because we only have 2G or 2.5G. And I'm like, what do you mean you only have 2.5G? So then we had to be very creative about how we package the application just for that market so that it doesn't have to download so much data over the wire. It was still slow, but it was a darn sight better. So, simple things that you don't usually think about just because you take some things for granted. And in this case, we took the customer's actual location, the customer's actual context. We took that a little bit for granted. And I could even tell you that's probably that simple issue alone, not putting ourselves in the context that our customers are in. That simple thing that sounds so obvious is probably accounting for more than 80% of all the product serious issues that I've ever had when I tried to do anything, is really just because we didn't have the same environment as the customer. And when the customer gets the product, they try it and go like, it's not working. What do you mean? It worked in testing. Not nobody pays for that, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
They say that for any sort of product adoption, you need the motivation, desire, and ability, right? Like, so then, or trigger and ability, rather. And then they might have the motivation to want to use the app. Of course, banking is a very basic service. Everybody wants to be banked. And then, but the desire the trigger could be there, but then the ability is still
Yeah.
not there. Just
Yeah.
It's amazing how many companies that come from abroad and then come here and then they think that, oh wow, I assume everybody has a credit card. I assume everybody has a very decent internet, right? Like, so
Great
I think
example. The credit card one is a really, really good example. I've seen that happen multiple times. Yeah, and and here we were with a banking platform, a mobile banking platform that was great because it was a single platform that was built to be minimally customized, to be deployed, implemented in multiple markets, and we did it for like 15 markets in 2 years, which is amazing. An amazing rollout. It was a fantastic team that I had the pleasure of working with. But then, even then, with all of the effort we had put into making it customizable, we still hit things that we didn't really realize. And that's where your flexibility as a product person, as a product team, because this involves product, involves engineering, involves the users. You need to be, you need to be ready to be flexible and move your body quickly to adjust to the punches that are coming your way.
okay. Just curious as to how that you solved the problem eventually. Did you have to rewrite the app completely, or what was the solution there?
No, thank goodness, no. We just had to basically, instead of using a CDN for all of the assets, all of the images, and all the stuff that's heavier that was coming through, we try to package as much as possible together with the wrapper, so that doesn't have to be loaded over the wire. It was just the API messages to go and get the banking data. So in the end, it wasn't like a rocket scientist kind of solution, but it was more than what we had normally done for any other market. And I don't think we had to do that in any other one after that. Or maybe we actually changed it so that everybody had that after that. I can't remember.
That was going to be my question. Did that eventually make the entire product better in other markets? You just loaded very fast because you
Yeah,
basically couldn't use CDNs.
I don't remember the details, but I imagine that what we would have done to simplify our deployment process to say, okay, fine, you know what, we can keep our assets, the heavier assets, let's keep them together because generally those don't tend to change. We had a lot of labels and things like that we pulled off the CDN for obvious reasons, the localization and whatnot. And so those were not the problem, but images, and and Standard Chartered back in the 2010s had Breeze, which is a very fun, sort of lighthearted approach towards mobile bank or banking in general, but especially mobile banking. And we had a lot of assets, we had a lot of graphics. It wasn't very like a standardized sort of material UI thing that we just use the same style sheet and assets as everybody else. So it was heavy-ish. For a web app these days, I think you'd call it actually pretty light. But back then, it was we did stuff. So I think that actually did end up changing the way we package. So it's okay, we can have a slightly bigger package. Just make sure that the things that we need to stay dynamic or more dynamic can still be fetched from the CDN rather than try and fetch the whole thing.
Got it.
Yeah.
And let's say every journey has its bumps, right? Like, so do you have a misstep that taught you a valuable lesson?
So
I'm
many.
sure there's plenty.
So many. I just talked about one, didn't I?
Yes.
Gosh. And I just said, almost all of them came from not, in spite of our best efforts, right? Not having had more time thinking about what exactly is going to be my customer's context, right? I've had one of the first ones I had in my career as a product manager, because I used to be a software engineer as well until 2005, and that's when I transitioned to product management, a business analyst first and then product manager. For example, we had a product before there were mobile phones, smartphones. We had a product that was on a handheld computer, like a Windows CE symbol type of tablet, and it only had like a black and white screen, and it was actually a military logistics application, and it looked beautiful. It ran great, except for the small problem that it's supposed to be used by military operators, sometimes in operations in theater, right, in military theaters, and they are not small fingered people, and even when they're not small fingered people, they're wearing gloves because and sometimes they're getting shot at, so they don't have a lot of patience to tap the button properly. Simple things like that. Okay. Oh, and then the shade of gray we were using was too light, so you couldn't see it when the sun is shining on it. So combination of problems where people are going like, well, when I'm in the desert and I need to push this button because I need to get to my ammo, I really need the button to be big and I need to be able to see where it is with the sun shining on it, and I don't want to go and get my infrared goggles to see it. So anyway, that was one of the first ones where I learned, you really have to think about the environment in which these things are going to be used and make smarter choices around that. And, I talked about the few things on the standard chart. There are others that were, less about, missteps, but they were just about calibrations. When we were in ad tech, we had a product that was originally meant to democratize access to, mobile advertising buying. In that day and age, you could buy ads, but it was you have to have a special account with either Google or even Facebook wasn't exactly accessible back then. And so we try to create a platform that made buying advertising very, very simple. In fact, our mantra was, the uncle at the kopitiam at the coffee shop can do it to promote his coffee. It turns out that, not surprisingly, the customer base that was interested in that product was not that big. And the people that were interested in that product were actually, the usual suspects that want to buy advertising, so namely agencies, media buyers who are looking to quickly get as much share of attention as they can and as targeted as possible. So we had to quickly change from our romantic ideal of wouldn't it be great if anybody could buy advertising online, and said, well, the problem is not everybody is buying, only these people are buying. So you have to change, pivot very, very quickly. So that was another, I guess you can call it misstep, but we pivoted very quickly and it worked out for a while. We had other issues after that. Yeah.
I think one of the patterns I'm seeing from what you describe is it's kind of also related to the theory of disruption, right? When you build a cheaper,
Yeah.
faster, or even looks like very simpler and inferior product at the beginning for a user with a lot less ability than what a usual high ability user is in an enterprise. For example, ad tech, buying ads, for example. Although, I mean, initially that might be the way that you thought about your hypothesis was we want every uncle, auntie at the kopitiam to be able to buy ads for their own food stalls so more people come and buy coffee. But it ends up actually simplifying the product and ends up actually removing a lot of the fluff that is in enterprise software, which in turn ends up disrupting the actual, like it's a very different market that it comes up to enterprise and they think, oh, this is so simple. Like, why wasn't this available from day one?
In the end, that's kind of what happened, because we designed the platform to be so accessible that it was actually easy for us to add on, easier, I wouldn't say easy, but easier to add on some of the power user utilities that the kind of people we then changed to target were looking for. And there was others, like, when the group that the original founders of that company before I joined started with, they took the whole concept of real-time bidding. They meant, they said, yeah, this is, it's everything about this needs to be real time. And it was overkill. We did things that were absolutely overkill for the markets that we were dealing with later on. But it was also a competitive advantage because we were able to do the buying and report on that buying within seconds, whereas most of the other platforms that we were competing with could only do it, best case scenario, in hours and sometimes days, like 24 hours. I'll tell you tomorrow what we've bought today and how well it performed, which in the internet age seemed completely ridiculous, but yet that was what people were buying. So we try. I think we might have made our mark there a little bit by providing some competitive motivation for people to accelerate their feedback loops in media buying.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in the ad tech and programmatic world, seconds versus hours, that's like 100x competitive advantage, right?
Yeah,
You're going to get
yeah,
that ad in front of the user before somebody else
yeah.
does. Yeah.
But you make a great
Cool.
point, though. Sometimes the way you approach the initial approach you have to whatever you're trying to do might be naive, might be simplistic, might be not misguided, but misaligned with whom is really the buyer, and that's okay, because you will learn. You will learn. I mean, hopefully you have enough time to learn, but the point is you will learn and you can move and adjust and pivot and be better. And so, if you're avoiding getting started because you're not sure if it's a surefire winner, then just start, do something, figure it out. You won't know until you've actually tried it. And
Yeah.
even just one customer can give you a lot of feedback already. You don't
Yeah.
need 1,000 or the kind of scale you might think you need.
Yeah. So hence the old adage, launch fast, iterate fast, fail fast, and then iterate, right? Like,
Yeah,
so
I'm glad you didn't say the second part of that because I have an issue with that. But okay, yeah.
What did you say? Fail fast. Oh, yeah.
Fail fast and break things, right?
Oh, fail
Move,
fast and break.
move fast and
Tell,
break things. Yeah,
what is it with that? Like,
that was the Facebook
curious.
thing, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, because I'm sorry, you can't. Maybe there was a point in time where you could move fast and break things, and nobody cares because you're a social network. Who cares? But I don't think they do that anymore. Facebook,
No.
or Meta. So as far as the mantra is concerned, this is not, I think, very useful. You want to move fast, I agree. Fail fast, sure, but the breaking things, please try not to, because that's actually very bad advice if you're trying to impress, especially like in B2B, right? No business is going to trust you if your stuff keeps breaking. Then it doesn't matter how fast you move.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed. Okay, so here's another interesting question, right? What is the one product or feature that you're surprised that hasn't taken off yet in Southeast Asia? And why do you think that has potential?
Gosh, has not taken off yet. Okay, well, I have a personal one that I wonder why, and I don't. I mean, when I put on my product manager hat, I can think of a lot of reasons why. But as a consumer, as a person, I go like, but it shouldn't be that hard. Which is uh, personal finance management. And maybe this is a unique situation for myself living in Singapore and looking at the people around me. But I look around and I see a lot of people don't have a lot of loyalty to their banks. They shop around. I'll open an account in bank A tomorrow. I'll do bank B, C, D, credit cards, for all the promotions and whatnot. But I wonder if it's a little similar in other markets in Southeast Asia, because what ends up happening is you have a collection of bank accounts or a collection of credit cards. And then you have to, at some point, a responsible person is going to want to reconcile all of that. I don't want to log into 5 different banks' mobile application to see all of my transactions or to see what exactly is my current balance. I mean, you always have some notion in your head, but some people really like to go and do, reconciliation at the end of the month or whatnot, make sure that credit card bill checks out. And not having a product that actually aggregates all of that feels strange. I've seen a couple that tried, Seedly actually in Singapore, tried a long time ago, and it kind of worked, but then they moved away from that. My guess is because how do you make money from it is an open-ended question. And I think there's another company in Singapore now that's trying to do that again. But at a regional level, especially for if there is such a thing as a regional trotter, instead of a globe trotter, people who operate in multiple areas of the region. Surely this must be a problem, a pain point that many people have. So I'm surprised that I don't see more of this on a personal level, much like how you see, for example, in Europe or in the US, where in the US, the perennial example was Mint, right? You could log on to Mint and you could capture all of your bank's data there, and you can basically, do your finances from there. I haven't really, and I think in Europe there's similar solutions, but I haven't heard of any that are, even just with one market that can do this across several banks. So I
Just,
imagine, yeah, go ahead.
sorry, just for the non-fintech listeners like me, right? Like over here, is there any sort of like regulatory hurdle to doing that? Like, are the banks opened up all the APIs and a user can give authorization and you can see somebody's credit
Yeah,
card statements?
well, not all of the banks, but the major ones certainly have. So there are open banking APIs, and in fact, the open banking APIs for consumers have been actually more available than open banking APIs for corporates, for transaction banking or corporate banking.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm surprised, but there is a lot of care and a lot of, excuse me, a lot of prudence around how you do the whole authentication bit and whatnot, because there is in the European Union, they've set up something that actually establishes not universal, but a framework for customer authentication. And that hasn't been done quite the same way in Southeast Asia because there's no authority to enforce one. So every central bank has been doing this, somewhat their own way. But that doesn't mean that you can't have, an aggregator. In fact, there are some of the American aggregators like Plaid. They do access to some of the local Southeast Asian banks, but in my experience, they're very wishy-washy. They're not very consistent in terms of their uptime.
Mhm.
And so I don't know if it's a compliance problem. I don't think so because I've seen it being done before. Seedly was able to do it. It wasn't exactly super fast, but it worked. And I know there's now some aggregators, and I can't remember the name, but there's another sort of personal budgeting app in I think based out of Singapore that tries to do the same thing, but their bank support was very limited.
Mhm.
So I think the problem is really more to do with, as an entrepreneur, as an investor, why should I do this? What's in it for me? I can't use people's financial data, right? Because that's draconian, right? Nobody wants that. I can't use advertising because that's also going down a rabbit hole. I can do sales for financial products or things like that, but that's kind of advertising plus plus. And then the only thing left is a subscription model. And are people willing to pay, even if it's very little, to have this kind of service? And so I think that's why fundamentally this hasn't taken off yet. It's just because what's the revenue model? What's the business model for this
Mhm.
outside of the data aggregation and advertising, which nobody wants to be in that space when you're crossing with a finance application. It's too draconian. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's the problem, isn't it? We start B2C and B2C subscription software, except for Singapore, which has the capacity to pay, but it's such a small market in terms of the
Yeah.
population. Then you see so many startups start B2C and pivot to B2B because they realize there's just no like sort of like nobody's like nailed that kind of a subscription software model for
Yeah.
B2C or even SMBs for that matter. Like
Yeah.
uh,
Well,
I think
yeah.
it's just a structural sort of like obstacle that seems to exist in this part of the
Yeah,
world.
I'm just guessing, but if any one of the Seedly original team is watching, maybe they can tell us what was the
The
what
hard
was
lessons.
the failure point.
Sure, I'll try to
Share
get
so we
them
can
on the
learn.
podcast.
Yeah, share so that we can learn and do better.
Definitely. Okay, cool. Now let's talk about everybody's favorite topic, right? Generative AI.
Ah,
So yeah, everybody's favorite words like a model a day keeps the scientist away is the new saying. So
never heard that one.
I just made that up on the spot. So
Good.
maybe it'll stick. Maybe it'll
I
stick.
think you
Let's see.
should mean that.
Should. Yeah, so how do you, okay, let's talk about generative AI and product, basically. I want to
Hmm.
specifically focus on product, right? So, and product development process, how do you envision that changing because of what we're seeing in generative AI?
Well, even though this has been around for almost a year now, and a year in the tech world seems like an eternity. It's only been a year. It's very very early days.
Mhm.
So the only way I've seen this being used so far that's very nutritious to the development process or to product development in general is with the whole co-pilots thing. So the co-pilot for programming, in spite of all of the potential hallucinations and things that all of the ethical concerns about how this data was trained and where exactly are you getting the intelligence to put in a block, to suggest a block of code such as that. It's undeniable that it makes a developer much more productive. It really does. And the code the code is no worse than what it would usually be. In fact, I think probably slightly better in terms of maintainability and code quality. But that doesn't mean that you can just trust it wholeheartedly, at least at the stage that we're still in. So you still need a human being, a developer who, you know, actually reads the code, doesn't take it for granted, lock, stock, and barrel, and double checks that it's actually doing what it's supposed to do and has no side effects. Much like how a developer does when they're reviewing code from a peer, right? Somebody puts up a pull request, I need to review it. What code is this, and why are you putting it there? So that same kind of diligence needs to be there. So I think we're far away still from the point where not too far away, but still far away from the point where an AI can just generate code that is plug and play,
Or is it then
right?
automatically executed, basically, to
Well,
do a task?
I think my opinion on that is that we're going to be code is going to be an incidental thing. Code is not the issue, right? In my early days of product management, with some of my now they were my mentors on that day, and now they've become good friends and still mentors. They used to say, if only we had, product management is awesome. If only we had a PowerPoint compiler, it would be amazing, right? The product would be built already. But I think that's actually in many ways where we're going. It's more like, okay, here is a Figma design, or here is a PowerPoint of how I want something to be done, or in a little bit of a science fiction, actually not so much anymore, but in a little bit of a very advanced example, I'm talking to an AI and I'm just describing what I want, and it just starts, prototyping it, or it just starts doing it. So I think that's really where we're going to go. So think less in terms of something that writes your script for you, and something that actually just does what you want. In almost like a no code kind of situation where you just see blocks of user interface showing up, because that's what you're saying that you want, and the AI sort of just says, well, I guess you need a table, or I guess you need a modal dialog box here or there, or you need this kind of layout, that kind of layout. So I think that's where we're going to go ultimately. But until we get there, definitely the developers are getting a ton of mileage, I think, just from the suggest me a block of code, or just give me a template for this particular type of, create, retrieve, update, delete type of thing.
Mhm.
The
And
crowd stuff.
what about product managers, designers? Like
That's
product management, do you think that they don't have to write such long PRDs anymore, or have to do wireframes anymore? Like
No, I do
all
think they
the
need to do. I do think they need to do wireframes. But what generative AI has done for me, and what I see people doing, is it does help a lot of filling in the sausage, right? All the boilerplate that's required, right? We're good at coming up with. Maybe I should speak personally, but I'm coming up with the conceptual bullet points of what we want to get is the hard work. That's the hard creative work. Putting it in a nice consumable format like a PRD or a functional specification document, or even a user story, that can actually be very taxing, and it takes up, that's not the hardest part of the work, but it's taking the most of your time, because you want to make sure you communicate as plainly as possible, but your concept is already there. So I've had direct experience with having, a generative AI, whether it's, ChatGPT or any of the others, sort of, facilitate that for me, and actually do a reasonable job for it, and
Mhm.
suggest really reasonable acceptance criteria, or fill in some bullet points into the functional specification that are boilerplate. I don't necessarily think about them anymore, just because, again, that same problem of taking things for granted, like not being in your customer's environment, but because it's trying to grab data from lots of different places, the large language model ends up coming up with some things that you go like, yeah, actually, that's a good idea. I should probably mention that. But because human beings are lazy, or because we're thinking about much higher value problems, we didn't think of doing that. But then we pay for it later on, perhaps in a QA stage, for example, or in a
Yeah.
legal review stage, for example.
So
Yeah.
basically, the grunt work for product managers has always been about writing those long, long documents, isn't it? Requirements. I need these screens, and this needs to click through to this. This should happen. I think these are like very much pattern oriented. They're like repeating patterns when you write user
Yeah.
stories, etc.
But I think
I mean, Hmm.
there's another use case for product managers, which is to literally have conversations with personas. So you can
Hmm.
set up ChatGPT to imagine it's this kind of person, and you can even not have to do the whole thing yourself. You can ask it to sort of say, what kind of things do you prefer, and it kind of gives you sort of this sort of very averages out of all of the, idiosyncrasies of what that persona might be. And it kind of gives you some more information about things that you might have not originally considered about the persona. But then you
Hmm.
can start asking that person questions. And so as a sounding board for your ideal customer persona, it is quite, I think I've seen it be quite useful. So especially in the days where there's a lot of remote working and you don't necessarily have the benefit of just sort of like turning your chair and talking to your colleague directly and say, hey, what do you think about this, that, or the other? That has been, I think, a blessing of the way you can use an open a chat large language model.
Do you think Gen AI will replace product managers one day? Should we
I
all
think
be worried about
I
our jobs?
no, not at all. And I think because the reason I say this is not because generative AI will replace product managers. It's more like it will be everybody will be in a position to become a product manager. Not
Mm,
because product manager is replacing what we do. That I think that's not the point. What we do, I separate what product managers do into two broad categories. One is the sort of businessy outbound product management, which is all about go to market, ideal client personas, the marketing aspect of it, the much more business minded type of product management. You have the other kind of product management, which is much more introverted, which I call technical product management, which is really much more about, we kind of know what we want to do. And what we really need to do is make sure that the engineering team and the testing team all stay focused and on point and don't waste time chasing rabbits, where they're not supposed to. And we represent the client and we keep, representing the client to those groups. So that's a much more technical aspect of product management. What I think this will do is it will perhaps make the job of a technical product manager less necessary, perhaps, but somebody is going to have to be thinking about the other stuff. Who is this serving? What do those people really need? What would be a good user interface? What would be a good experience for these people to go through? The difference will be that you are now able to say what you want to say to an AI and have them potentially generate the first prototype, and
mm.
then maybe hire some engineers to do the fine tuning. But as the product manager, as a product conceptualizer, as a product pusher, that is never going to go.
No, I agree. I think what it has done for me personally is that it's helped me be a beginner designer, let's say a beginner sort of user research.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a UX designer doing user research or like specifically, as jobs became more specialized, I think we went to rely on each other, and hence teams became
Yeah.
bigger, ultra specialist roles. But I think what AI is creating is probably more generalist in a way, like an
Yes.
engineer writes a PRD, or engineer can ask AI to give me potentially a wireframe for a design.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, it might
Yeah.
not be as good as what a really seasoned
Yeah.
product person might come up with, but it's still good enough for them to augment their own that they can do now. They become multi-skilled in a way, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's actually a point of worry for me. Not, like I said, I used to be a software guy, an engineer. I used to write code, and it was very quickly obvious to me that there's a lot of people that can write code, and then if you want to be really good at it, you really have to develop a niche and a specialization. You have to understand that really, really, really well. And this is, I think, now going to be compounded by the presence of generative AI, because it's going to be very easy for anybody to create a generic piece of code that does some obvious stuff, which will make the bar for somebody to be a software engineer. They're going to have to be much more like computer scientists, because they're going to have to really be deep thinkers into some specific aspects of a domain, rather than being a generic sort of full stack kind of guy. Because there will be tooling that very soon there will be tooling that can execute that for you. And when I say very soon, I don't mean tomorrow, 5-10 years for sure, and maybe even sooner, but certainly not tomorrow. And I think that's actually a little bit of an issue for people who are on the product manufacturing aspect of a tech business to be concerned with. I know this is a product management sort of centered conversation, but I've often thought about what some of my colleagues are going to be doing. So it's really they have to be very good at something like higher level architecture or particular cloud orchestration experts, because the rest of the stuff, you're going to be able to tell a computer what you want, and it's going to be able to spit it back out, and you have to make very minimal adjustments. There's also the risk that nobody understands what the hell the AI is spitting out, so nobody will know how to do the adjustments anymore, because these guys all created the AI and then they left. Yeah, we'll see. There's a lot of there's a lot of water to go under this bridge about how pervasive will AI be and actually replace people's jobs.
So what would be your advice for like in Southeast Asia? Let me be a little bit specific. Let me try to be a little bit more specific, right? Like in Southeast Asia, the tech scene is evolving. Product is probably going to evolve with that. The product management function, right? Like if there's an aspiring product manager wanting to become a product leader tomorrow, what's the one key skill, or is there a strategic approach that you might advise them
Ooh.
in this kind of scenario?
Well, I'll go with my personal mantra, my fallback skill, which is I summarize it as diplomacy, but this could be represented in many different ways. I think as a product manager, most of my career, most of what I had to do was to bridge together different points of view on the same conceptual element, right? Customers want one thing, engineers say it can't be done, that thing can't be done, and then the investors say, oh, but we can't fund that, or the boss says it needs to be done faster, and the QA people say, it's all full of bugs. I don't know. The point is that a lot of what I spend my time doing is reconciling different groups' priorities or requirements, if you will, which is almost the very definition of the role. And so
Sometimes contradicting priorities, right?
very contradicting. One wants it in black, the other one wants it in white. And you have to sort of like figure out, okay, I need to convince these guys to go with some shade of gray. So how am I going to do that? And that's where I fall back on a lot of diplomacy. Diplomacy is a very wide skill. You can interpret it the way you want. Some people call it negotiation as well, which is certainly a big part of it. But it's really just the ability to connect with different groups of people. So I talk a lot about empathy as well. Connect with different group of people to understand where they're coming from, understand their what is their pain. In some cases, it's not just their pain, it's their pain and what is their bullshit. Being able to figure out which one is which and how to cut through it. And how to soothe the parts that can be soothed. And that's how you build compromises and trying to figure out how to build those compromises is I think a huge part. So when you're starting out, this might not look very useful because you're a business analyst or you've just got hired as a junior PM. But I think um, the moment you stop being told exactly what to do, and you're just told what is the outcome that is expected. This is when you can start applying this kind of skill set to say, all right, my boss is expecting this to come out. I don't know, a new feature, and a new analysis, a new metric, or something like that. So you need to start figuring out where to go in the different parts around you, your organization, your company, whatever, to figure out where to get what you need. And this is exactly where this diplomacy, that empathy comes from. There could be many others that somebody else would have said. Someone would have said design, someone would have said communication skills, somebody would have said, technical skills. I'm a little bit more leaning towards soft skills just because technical skills usually can be picked up. Usually. Some of them are harder than others, of course, but practicing your soft skills, there's no replacement for that. And so developing those skills, especially something around negotiation and diplomacy, I think is going to, go very long for you. And in Southeast Asia's context, I think that's even more important because, again, cultural differences. What works well in Indonesia may not work well in Thailand or Vietnam. And, all of these cultural approaches need to be bridged or need to be, negotiated, if you will. And so that's where being able to apply diplomacy and figure out compromises is an essential skill in my.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the point in Southeast Asia, right? Like, try saying no on the face of a Thai person, right? Like, it's and a product manager's job, like most of the time, is going to be saying no, right? You need to be able to say no, but that's where I think the key skill of diplomacy, I think, very much comes in. And to practice good diplomacy, you need to understand the cultural nuances of like how it's going to be received, whatever you say, right? This straight talk Silicon Valley style, unfortunately, guys, will not ready for it
No. And I'd argue even now that straight talk doesn't work
yet.
anymore. The times are different. Times have changed for sure.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so I think I have one more time for one more question. I think this is something that you can definitely be an expert on. Let's talk about startups and founders. You work with a lot of founders in Southeast Asia, right? Um, what do you see are some of the common mistakes that founders make? I mean, this for the founders out there who are trying to build products and get their startup off the ground. What is some of the common mistakes that you see founders are making when they start out building products?
I From the founders I've had the pleasure of working with, I've worked with some amazing people and crazy people in a positive sense. We could also argue in the negative sense, but I've had the pleasure of seeing some amazing spirits, pushing the boundaries. And so I will say that their mistakes are not so much their mistakes. They're a product of their time, in the sense that in their time, how you made a name for yourself, how you made an impact was by uh, taking big swings, not being cautious necessarily. That was then, and so I've worked with founders that had amazing vision, fantastic design taste, and decided that they were going to build a competitor to the iPad, and they did. And they did. The problem is, there was not enough funding, and the idea was a little bit crazy, but the product itself was amazing. You can look it up. The company was Fusion Garage, and the product was the Grid 10. There's many YouTube videos about it. It was a visionary product, way ahead of its time. The first Google, oh sorry, not Google, but the first Android tablet. And the vision behind it was absolutely amazing. So much so that when I first got interviewed and I saw the vision, I was like, where do I sign? I need to do this. I need to be a part of this. It was amazing. And, but, and then there was the other founders that I worked with where what they wanted was, again, this is the years of, Uber having, exponential growth, and we were just knocking it out of the park. And we know now, with the benefit of hindsight, we know how those stories went. But what was, the way you got attention back then was to actually take those kinds of big swings and make those kinds of aspirational designs where, we are going to make it big. We're gonna go for $1 billion. That's where we're gonna go. Forget unicorn. It's decacorn. So I've seen people go through this, and I at the time you could argue they were being, or even now you could argue they were being megalomaniac, or they were being too ambitious, and maybe they were objectively, but also they were doing that because that's exactly what was expected of them, and in some cases their vision matched. And even in some cases the execution did. It's just that stars didn't align, and investment didn't come through, or the revenue wasn't what it was supposed to be. So it was a damn shame. So I think back then, and we're talking about the 2010s, this was what investors wanted to see. They wanted to see big swings. So you needed to be flamboyant. You really needed to peacock your vision, and you really needed to be bigger than life. I think things have changed now. Obviously, they're no longer in the days of cheap money, and money is much more expensive now, and there's still some uncertainty. And so I think what founders need to do now is a little bit different. So they need to have a much more easygoing approach. Not to say don't be aggressive, but you certainly cannot be promising megalomaniac returns within the first year, because nobody's going to believe that, right? And you just you kind of going to get laughed out of the room. So I think I would say that I've seen people doing these things, and at the time even I might have thought this is a little bit crazy, but in hindsight I think they had to be. So I don't know if I'd call that a mistake, but I think you really need to be mindful of the audience and mindful of the times, right?
Mhm.
Back then, people expected big swings, and if you don't have big swings, you're not going to get the funding because it's not spectacular enough, right? VCs also like to brag with each other a little bit, so they need to have something spectacular in their hands. But these days, it's the other way around. VCs are actually probably going to get more credit for being cautious and for only betting on things that have much more of a structured approach, or a calmer approach. And yes, it's an interesting product. It might pan out within 5 years, certainly not in the next year. If you do, that's great. And if you're passionate to pitch in that with that energy, I think that's amazing. Be true to yourself. I'm not saying if you're a high energy type of person, you want to be a founder. don't hide that. That's who you are. But if you don't, if you're not that kind of a person, then don't try to generate that in yourself just because you think it's necessary. It's not. Be truthful to yourself and approach it in the way that that is true to yourself, and be mindful of what your investors are going to be wanting to hear. Let's put it that way. I mean, it is a sales job at the end of the day, pitching for funding. If anything, I'd probably advise people to be very conservative with their projections. Don't go out and swing and say, yeah, I'm going to get 10 million users in 1 year. You're going to get, give a realistic number that you really think you can reach. And, in fact, call that a negotiating position, because the investor might say, could you do whatever you said times 10? And you might be in a position to say, yeah, actually I can. So, be moderated if you can be. If that's your nature, then that's great. If you're more high energy and you're more flamboyant and you like to, be more impressive, by all means do that. But I think you're going to have to show other areas where you're being moderated, whether it's in financial projections or where exactly you're going to do your cost, what exactly you're going to do with the money. It's great. It's imperative to be passionate about the project that you're pitching. But I think these days you also have to be very moderate with how you've structured the business plan.
It's almost like I come up with a pitch deck, and then what would an under-promising version of this be? Let me just promise that, and over-deliver if I can, right? Like as product people, we love that, and
That would
under-promise and
be ideal.
over-deliver.
That would be ideal. Look, as you said, I've worked for and with a lot of founders and entrepreneurs, in a few, not a lot, a few in Southeast Asia, but I've never been one myself. And I have tremendous respect and admiration for the bravery and the guts that it takes to stand up, an idea, a business plan, and go out to investors and actually sweet talk them out of their money and say, I have an idea. This is going to work. Believe in me, invest in me, and we'll make money together. It takes a lot of guts to do that. So for anybody out there who's listening to it and who's thinking about it, by all means, go for it. It is tough. It takes a lot of guts. Nobody is going to make fun of you. If anything, anybody should just really be respectful and supportive, because it takes guts to do that. On the other hand, be realistic.
Be realistic. I agree. Okay, cool. I think we are at the end of the deep dive questions. So let's go into a rapid fire round. So you got to give me an answer without thinking twice.
That's going to be easy.
So yeah, it's going to be probably. Let's see what comes out of this. Okay. One product metric you obsess over.
One, gosh. MEU, DAU, feature usage. MEU, DAU has been my go-to for ages, but yeah.
Okay. A growth hack you swear by.
Growth hack I swear by. Viral marketing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One Silicon Valley mantra that doesn't work here.
One, like fail fast and break things. Yeah, that doesn't work here.
Okay. A newsletter.
Move fast.
Move fast and don't break things. Yeah. Nice. A newsletter or blog you recommend to anyone listening to this, other than this, of course.
Of course. I'd say for product people, Lenny Lachitsky's newsletter is a great one. I also recommend. Okay, let's just go with Lenny. I have another one that I might recommend.
No, go for it. It's okay. Tell me.
I forgot the name.
The pragmatic engineer?
No, it's Hustle Badger. I just remembered. Hustle Badger.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Hustle Badger.
Badger.
All right.
Hustle Badger.
Hustle Badger. Okay. Yeah. Hustle Badger it is. Okay. One ChatGPT productivity tip that's worked for you.
Oh, okay. Well, I already gave you one, but okay. A fun one, which is actually what I was thinking about earlier, is that ChatGPT now, the app, has a voice interface. So you don't have to type anymore. You can just chat to it and it actually chats back to you. It's amazing. That is very exciting. And so if you've seen the movie Her, this is starting to get to those kinds of levels of sort of wow.
Wow. Cool. Nice. Awesome. So I think that's the end of the segment here. So thanks, Nuno, for sharing with us all these words of wisdom, right? So we started with challenges and opportunities in Southeast Asia. I think the fact that it's a very diverse sort of geographical market with different cultural nuances, customer behavior, even like words being called differently in banking in Islamic countries for some terms. I think you shared really good tidbits there. and we moved on to how you adapted a product successfully to a local sort of need. Thanks for sharing that tidbit about the Standard Chartered Bank, and you assume that 3G would be given, but it's not. So assumption skill in product. Remember that, guys. And then you also shared a couple of times that missteps or small pivots that you had to make. We discussed how something that was built for a mom and pop shop, like an ad tech product or a programmatic real time bidding product, ended up being useful in a different way and really getting traction amongst a larger enterprise sort of setting. And also ended up disrupting some of your competitors who had to then catch up with you. Right. So that was very interesting. And you were surprised that there's no personal sort of financial management app or service that exists that connects to all your credit cards and bank accounts, which is always potential here, but not sure why. And then a lot of tips on how generative AI will change product managers, product development process, co-pilots, obviously doing the grunt work. And we create the framework and it fills up the nitty-gritty detail. But then you're still an optimist in terms of saying, okay, there will still be product managers, there will be still product leaders.
Absolutely.
And the biggest takeaway for me is the keyword is diplomacy when it comes to your career graph as a product person. I think try and develop these skills. I think it's not just communication skills, it's not just technical skills, but the keyword is diplomacy, like because you need to build consensus at some stage with different stakeholders wanting different things. Awesome. And then you spoke about founders and their vision and your respect for them, and but the need to be very realistic in this
Yeah.
day and age. Cool. I think that's a ton of learning for me. I hope that our listeners or viewers are going to learn a ton from this as well. Thank you,
Hope so.
Nuno.
Thank you, Vasant. It was awesome to have this time with you.